So, in my habit of turning off the video and then remembering something I wanted to add, one more thing about birds is a lot of people connect birds to migration. And although not all birds do migrate, or there wouldn't be a bunch of birds still around here in the wintertime, what happens is if a bird's main food items go away during a certain season, but they're available somewhere that they can fly to, they fly there. And then when the food items become available again, they fly back. So they can basically take the services of two different ecosystems to support the population. Now, birds are much more omnivorous than you would think. I was very surprised. I started reading about birds and found out that, they've got their, some of them eat bugs and some of them eat plants, and but they tend to do double duty. Like something like a hummingbird, we tend to think it goes into the flower and it takes nectar, which when you think about it is not a full nutrient source. You'd be bad if you ate just nectar all the time. But they, about half of their diet are little bitty bugs that they catch out of the air that supply them with proteins and lipids and the other sorts of nutrients that they would need. And that's true for a lot of birds. But the ones that are really better omnivorous can kind of weather a winter. And the ones that are very much connected to like being in the water, they get their stuff out of the water and then there's ice, or they're very dependent on insects and the insects are gone away, or they're scavengers and during the winter, they're still dead things, but they're solid as a rock. They go away and then they come back when the weather warms up. Or, like around here, there are places where open water continues, or if it's spring fed, or there's another reason why the ponds don't freeze. And you'll notice that those have a small population of ducks that just stick around through the whole winter. So they're not leaving because of the cold. They're leaving because their food isn't available. If their food's available, they hang around and they can get by. Okay, I wanted to add that. Now, I blame myself for a lot of this sometimes, because sometimes I start the recorder and it doesn't actually start and I don't notice. This time I started it on this part of the chapter, and I know it started, and then at some point it went beep and the screen went blank and it just didn't pick it up. So when I pulled the overhead stuff over, it's already been written on, because I already went 10 minutes into this spiel when obviously the system crapped out. Hopefully it won't do that. This is the very last part of the very last chapter. So we're going into the mammals. There's three major groups of modern mammals. The monotremes, the marsupials, and the placentals. We'll talk about those. This is the family tree. Here's the weird guys with sails on their backs. You get some branches off that were somewhat reptilian, definitely somewhat reptilian. And then a diversification going into the era of the dinosaurs. And they're actually starting to find that during the era of the dinosaurs, there were some decent sized mammals around, because it was thought for a long time that the only mammals around were so small and unobtrusive that they managed to survive, the predation of the giant dinosaurs. But there were some decent sized mammals as well. As I said, I already wrote on this thing. We are endothermic. We generate our own heat. We insulate ourselves with hair, whenever available. Hair captures small pockets of air like styrofoam. It's a pretty good insulator. It's pretty cheap in terms of production. The only mammals that don't have hair either live in an area so warm that they don't really need to retain heat, or they dive deep enough in the water that the air pockets and hair would be squished out. So they use fat, blubber, as an insulator. That's metabolically pretty expensive. And you can't afford to use it because it's your insulation, so that you don't lose your metabolic heat to the water. Water takes heat really easily. So in things like whales and walruses and deep diving seals, um, they use something other than hair for insulation. And the difference between hair and fur, supposedly fur grows to a certain length and just kind of stops, and hair just grows and grows and grows and grows and drops out, and other hair replaces it. That's not as reliable a feature, a difference as it sounds. So we're just lumping everything together as hair. We have weird teeth. Is that unlike other animals with teeth, reptiles with teeth, amphibians with teeth, fish with teeth, we only get 2 sets during our lifetime. We get an early set, and then a set pushes those out, and we get an adult set. And if we lose those, we're out of luck, is that we don't replace them, which seems kind of crazy. I don't really understand what the, I mean, most mammals get by with that, so apparently it isn't a big enough disadvantage to have, given us 3 sets or the potential for a 3rd tooth. I mean, not everybody, I've got a 4th teeth that I had right there. So it's not an across the board, every single individual follows the rules. But another neater thing about our teeth, and this is very much unlike what you get in other vertebrates, is that we have different functional teeth. We have choppers in the front, we have tearers in the back, or in the side here, and if we're meat eaters, we've got big ones. Sometimes animals that tear at leaves have them too. And then we've got grinders in the back. And this gives mammals an ability to diversify into other types of food that just requires some shifting in the chemistry of their digestive system. Whereas meat-eating dinosaurs didn't really have teeth that would have allowed them to be also chowing down on plants. And plant eaters, other than eating bugs occasionally, didn't really have the teeth that would have made them effective predators. Whereas our ancestors were primarily plant eaters, and we became pretty good meat eaters once we got out into the open and there weren't a lot of food items available. And it turned out that meat was a good supplement. Another thing, there are other animals in other groups that produce secretions that their young feed on to help them develop early on. But we're the only group that does that as a whole group, that produces milk. In early mammals, it's just a secretion onto the surface of the skin. Pretty quickly, nipples evolved so that the young could latch onto it, and it was a much more efficient delivery system. But milk got everything you need. You think about it, this has got to be true, right? Little animals grow into bigger animals with milk, so all of the carbohydrate and the protein and the lipid requirements and the minerals and vitamins that you would need to grow, which are not necessarily everything you need through your whole lifetime, but they're in there, depending on whether the parent has got input that's right. Some minerals and vitamins need to have kind of a throughput where it goes in as food into the parent and it goes out into the milk for the offspring, because parents don't store that stuff, or adults don't store that stuff. So those are the basic features of mammals. There's other things, but those are the big deal. The subgroups. You've got the monotremes, which include the platypus and the echidna. They're found in Australia and Tasmania. Australia as a continent split off from the other continents long enough ago that the types of mammals that existed at the time just kind of continued and went through evolution, but didn't develop the additional reproductive abilities that the placentals did elsewhere in the world. Something similar happened in South America, but that kind of hit a big snag when North America connected to South America, and a lot of placentals migrated across and kind of put the mammals, the native mammals of South America, out of business, outcompeted them. You probably heard the stories when platypus pelts were sent from Australia back to England. The scientists in England thought that it was a practical joke, that somebody had sewed a bunch of things together like duck bills and duck feet and a beaver body. They said, this is not a real animal. And you say it lays eggs? That's crazy. And it's got a poison spine. It's got a poison spine underneath a kind of here, well, actually on the back legs. But they eventually packed up and sent live ones, or mostly live ones. That convinced them that they did exist. Now this I know looks like a hedgehog that you might buy in a pet store. And again, that's convergent evolution, is that these are what they call spiny anteaters or echidnas. And these also they're monotremes, they lay eggs. And they're the only mammals that do that. Here's the egg. These guys, one of the weird claim to fame these guys have is that for their body size, they have very large brains. And they don't think it's because they're particularly smart. They think it's because they never sleep. Whereas we have a dedicated part of our brain that we use in the daytime to kind of temporarily store memories. And then when we're sleeping at nighttime, we go into it and we pick through it and put stuff into the file system while we're asleep into permanent memories. That's when you're dreaming. That's why your dreams are so weird. But they tend to connect to things that have happened to you in the last couple of days. Because you're taking and opening files up and it's like, this comes out as an image or whatever. So we have a part of the brain that does double duty when we sleep and when we're awake. They don't sleep, so they need the same part. They need two parts of the brain doing each of those simultaneously. And that's the theory about why their brains are big for their body size. They're not huge brains because they're little animals, but for their body size, they're pretty doggone big. So that's one subgroup of the mammals, the monotremes. Okay, leave yourself some room here. I'm just going to write these down before I move this out of the way and start going up to the overheads. The marsupials are the pouched mammals, where the embryos develop inside for a while. What develops faster than anything else are their front legs and their feet. And so they give birth to what looks like a very undeveloped pinky that actually climbs from the mother's genital opening, climbs up the mother's belly. Usually she's in a position where it's easy, not that hard to do. But that's why they need their front feet and claws to work. She has a pouch. They get into the pouch. At the base of the pouch is a nipple, or multiple nipples if this animal produces multiple young, like possums do. And the embryo, because not really a fetus yet, I don't think, maybe it's a fetus. Doesn't matter to you, but it matters to me. Attaches to the nipple and finishes its development using the nutrition from the milk that's produced. And eventually, a fully developed young marsupial comes out of the pouch and maybe goes back into nurse. The famous ones are the kangaroos, the koala bears. But if you, now Australia right now is a lot of the middle of the continent, which is about the same size as the United States, not counting Alaska and Hawaii. A lot of the middle is desert, but it didn't used to be. It used to be much more tropical rainforest kind of stuff. There are tropical rainforests in parts of Australia, but it was much more widespread. Things move around, currents change, water distribution and heat distribution changes. You can find in the Australian fossil record the marsupial equivalent of a bear, or the marsupial equivalent of a cow. Things that superficially look like cows, but would have been marsupials. Look like bears would have been marsupials. Look like saber-toothed cats, but would have been marsupials. And then you get things that don't really look like their equivalent. Is that a kangaroo, ecologically, is basically a deer. Is that that's the job that it performs in the ecosystem. But it doesn't look anything like deer elsewhere in the world. But it's an eco-species. It occupies the same niche as white-tailed deer would around here. Although white-tailed deer are not as good at kicking the crap out of threats. And then there's marsupials at all levels. There's little bitty guys and they don't get that big. The kangaroos are about the biggest ones now, but they used to get really, really big. In the rest of the world, the marsupials have largely been outcompeted. is the possum is the famous one that still exists around the world, but there's not a lot of other ones. The third group, the placentals, exist in the rest of the world, but are very rare in Australia. There's only a couple of placentals that are native to Australia. A couple of them are bats, so that makes sense. A couple of them that you tend to connect to Australia, like people that live in Australia, and dingoes, were pretty late immigrants, like last ice age or so immigrants. So they don't really count as native animals. So here's what they decided was the representative marsupial, a possum. Nice prehensile tail. These are the nipples, also known as, I remember reading that this is pronounced as tits, but I have never looked it up. Somebody may have been making a joke on me, but that's what I was told. Here's what develops inside for a while before it migrates out. And you can see this is very much still looks like an embryo. The difference between an embryo and a fetus is that during embryo's period, you're kind of getting everything started. So at the end of the embryo period, all of the major organs and structures are started. They may not be developed at all, they may not be functional at all, but they're there. And then the fetal period, you're growing them and developing them and getting them so that they work. And I mean, technically what we give birth to as humans is still just an advanced fetus, because we're not done developing our brains for a couple of years. If you've seen pinky mice definitely come out as fetuses and need to nurse for a while to become adults. So this idea that the development isn't complete when something is born isn't just something that happens in the marsupials. It also happens in the placentals. In the placentals, development is relatively complete inside the mother. So much more advanced fetal development, in some cases pretty close to complete. If you've ever had guinea pigs or had experience with guinea pig babies come out, nurse a very short time. They're very large compared to the mother and are much able to feed themselves pretty quickly. But most mammals come out, and at least for a period, they're nursing off of mom in order to get to a point where they can actually feed themselves. And how developed or undeveloped varies a lot from mammal to mammal. It has a lot to do with how protected they are. Mice produce their young in burrows and then go out and feed and come back. And so the babies are protected, as predators can't get at them. So you can give birth to somewhat undeveloped babies, and then you're not carrying a bunch of developing babies around while you're scurrying around trying not to get eaten out in the wild. Similar to kind of what nesting birds do. There are a number of placental groups. I'll go slowly. The group with the most species in it are the bats. Again, flight is a wonderful adaptation, but they are hairy. The rodents is another huge group. Find them everywhere, all sorts of different varieties of rodents. There's a group that's technically called the carnivores, which is, because it's biology, why wouldn't we make it confusing? And they are meat eaters. But carnivore as an English word just means meat eaters, and anything can be, we're carnivores, but we're not carnivores. We're carnivores in that we eat meat, but we're not in the group carnivores, which would have the cats and the dogs and the raccoons, depending on the classification system, possibly the seals. Some classification systems, the seals are separate. In our classification lab, they're separate. But things that pounce on other animals and tear them to pieces, carnivores. Actually named because they have carnassial teeth, special type of teeth in their backs. There's a whole range of different groups of animals whose toes have modified into hooves. Sometimes one like you get in horses, sometimes two like you get in antelopes and pigs and such. There's the ones that have gone back into the oceans and have adapted pretty effectively. The whales, biggest animals ever, is that a blue whale is bigger than the biggest dinosaur ever was. Sperm whale's pretty doggone big. Took their hearing, which developed in the air, because in the water you can kind of hear through your skin. Water conducts sound so well that you can feel it. But in the air, animals that live in the air have developed a secondary hearing system that in whales and dolphins and such, they've actually modified to use as kind of a sonar. And actually bats have done that, for at least the night-flying, insect-eating bats have done that. Because once you're sensitive enough to pick up air vibrations, you can do it in other situations. And then there's our group. Our group are the primates. Lot of primates. Now, the one thing I'm going to get out there is that there is a difference between our group, which has the gorillas and the orangutans and us, the chimpanzees and us, the apes, and monkeys, which are built like four-legged animals. If you watch monkeys, you know, a gorilla or a chimpanzee will kind of walk on its knuckles, but they're not really built that way. And if you give them stuff to do, they'll get up and walk around on their hind feet. Monkeys are very much angular this way, where they're definitely they're built as four-legged. And their ability to move around on just their rear feet is very much limited. So there is a definite difference. We are related to monkeys, but our ancestors were the apes. Is that monkeys and apes diverged a long, long time ago. I think, yeah, that's gonna cover it. That is the end of the last chapter, end of the last group, the placental. Yeah, I know it says eutherian. That's a very old designation for placentals. The placenta is what we connect to in the womb, where the nutrients move from one blood system to another, from the mother's into the embryo, and waste materials move from the embryo into the mother's. Pretty effective system.